Live from Washington, D.C., this is Balance of Power with Joe Mathieu.
China signals defiance as Canada claps back. Welcome to the Tuesday edition of Balance of Power as Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney matches U.S. tariffs dollar for dollar. And President Xi of China threatens all necessary measures to protect its economic relationship with Iran. We're going to get the latest in a moment from Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall, who is live at the White House. We'll have insights from Congressman Gabe, Democrat of Rhode Island, who is vice chair of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, with insights and analysis from our political panel. Bloomberg Politics contributors Jeanne, Zaino, and Rick Davis are with us for the hour, and it's all after a look at Wall Street. We start with the Tuesday trade right now, and Charlie Pellet at World Headquarters in New York. Hey, Charlie.
Oh, well, hello there, Joe Mathieu. A clapback indeed. You nailed it. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney matching dollar for dollar the new tariffs imposed by President Trump over the weekend, announcing support for support programs for Canadian businesses that have been hurt by the escalating trade war. Canada is going to double its existing counter tariffs on U.S. steel and aluminum products to 50%. By the way, those steel companies actually trading higher right now. We have got Nippon Steel, the parent of U.S. Steel, up by just about 0.9%. Cleveland Cliffs right now gaining 1.3%, and Nucor up by about 0.8%. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ are all advancing today. S&P 500 index higher now by 22 points, up by about 0.3%. Dow Industrials up 100 now, up by about 0.2%. NASDAQ up 0.6%, and the NASDAQ 100 index now also higher by 0.6%. The SOX, the Philadelphia Stock Exchange's semiconductor index, up 1.3%. This ahead of Nvidia earnings tomorrow after the close of trading. Nvidia shares up now by 1.7%. The 2-year at 4.20%, the 10-year 4.64%, the 30-year 5.17%. Gold now lower by 0.2%, $46.41 the ounce, and West Texas Intermediate crude down 3.4%, $82.10 for a barrel of WTI. Bitcoin was above 80K, right now 79,144. Right now we got Bitcoin up about 0.3%. Recapping stocks higher, S&P up 22, up 0.3%. That, Joe Mathieu, is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, many thanks. We'll have more from Charlie Pellet on the markets in just about 20 minutes' time as we connect the dots here between Washington and Wall Street with a message of defiance today coming from both China and Canada, not always invoked in the same sentence. Of course, our trading partner Canada is responding to a tit-for-tat that we've been describing over the past couple of days following trade talks that fell apart over the weekend. China has a very different matter on what is now D+1 if you're following the administration's economic actions against Iran. Yesterday was projected by Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent as D-Day. And Xi Jinping does have some thoughts on the idea of secondary sanctions against Chinese entities that are doing business with and trading with Iran. Hours after the U.S. sanctioned dozens of these Chinese organizations and threatened to target more. Remember, the secretary said there would be more to come this week. Beijing responding, saying its relationship with Iran, quote, should not be disrupted or undermined, unquote, knowing, of course, that President Xi will be meeting with President Trump on the 24th of September right here in the United States, here in Washington. As for Canada, a dollar-for-dollar match. That's the message from Mark Carney, the Prime Minister. Matching tariffs imposed by President Trump over the weekend, doubling existing counter tariffs on steel and aluminum to 50%. We heard from Doug Ford as well, the Premier of Ontario, now in his own tit-for-tat, a bit of rhetoric back and forth with President Trump, who called him out on Truth Social for bluster. Here's what he said yesterday.
No matter what President Trump sends our way, we'll have your backs. We will be there for you to protect your jobs and paychecks and stand up for Canada. The Prime Minister has my full support in this decision to walk away from a bad deal that would have hurt Canadian workers and undermined Canadian sovereignty.
We will be speaking with Premier Ford on the late edition of Balance of Power, and I hope you'll join us. That'll be at 5 p.m. Eastern. He usually comes packed with sound bites. But we first want to talk with Tyler Kendall, Bloomberg's White House correspondent, is on the North Lawn right now tracking all of this. Tyler, I'm not sure even where to begin today, so why don't we just stick with Canada right now? Was this an administration prepared for reciprocal or counter tariffs back from Canada as well?
Well, Joe, it appeared that the president might have been gearing up for this action, one, because the Canadian prime minister had telegraphed as much. He did make good on his original threat to match the tariffs dollar for dollar. But just by the fact that we have seen a flurry of posts from President Trump today out on Truth Social in regard to the conflict with Canada and trade, in part saying in one of them, I deal with many countries and Canada is easily the most difficult and unreasonable. Of course, our own reporting has indicated that Canadian officials have alleged that the U.S. was changing the, quote, goalposts when it came to the differences in the trade agreement that ultimately derailed the deal getting through. But, Joe, I think evident by the fact that Canada's reciprocal tariffs are expected to go into effect on September 8th, the next round of escalation by the U.S. January 1st could lead to some negotiating room going forward.
Well, those two dates are awfully important. So this is clearly not a case closed. But your point about the Truth Social posts, I counted 27 since 6:58 a.m., Tyler, and one of them includes this idea the president is floating now, the U.S. giving serious consideration to changing the name of Lake Ontario to Lake America, he says, in that we don't expect doing much business with Ontario any longer. Is this a joke?
I would take the president probably at his word. If you're joining us on the television, you can see the map that he is issuing right there. We'll have to see how this ultimately goes from here. Of course, there are a lot of different leverage points, negotiating points, but this does play into the broader idea that there have been escalating tensions between President Trump and the Canadian Prime Minister, Mark Carney, in particular, keeping in mind that Mark Carney had campaigned on basically countering President Trump and the tariff war a couple of years ago. And we have seen just escalating tensions since then, whether that was his address at Davos, whether that was President Trump threatening tariffs over wildfire smoke. And this appears to be the latest escalation in what is essentially now a pretty sudden reversal. We thought we were getting very close to a deal. We had sources familiar telling us here at Bloomberg some of those levies were going to be lowered, but at the end of the day, it just couldn't get over the finish line.
Wow, really something. Tyler, I need to ask you about President Xi quickly. We're going to be talking in just a moment with the vice-ranking member, House Foreign Affairs Committee. Congressman Amo is with us from Rhode Island. So we have geopolitics on our minds here. President Xi, pretty clear about the idea of secondary sanctions and knowing that China would have to be part of this for the so-called D-Day, or I guess Operation, what are we calling it again? It's Operation Scofflaw or Outcast. That's what it is. The relationship with Iran, quote, should not be disrupted or undermined. China will take all necessary measures to safeguard its interests. What now, Tyler?
Seeming to imply that China is prepared to retaliate if the U.S. does make good on its threats to hold those countries that still have financial ties with Iran accountable. The backdrop here being that China remains the top importer of Iranian crude to the tune of 90% of Iran's oil exports go to Beijing. The Treasury Secretary was asked yesterday multiple times about whether this would apply to China. He didn't rule it out. He said that no one is going to be above this. I have to say, Joe, though, the people that I'm speaking to here in Washington don't believe that the administration thinks that China is going to cleanly cut financial ties with Iran, but perhaps this is seen as a negotiating tactic to help lower some of the leverage here, that China could maybe reduce its imports of Iranian crude, not cut them off completely, and that would still help the U.S. in its push to get Iran back to the negotiating table.
Tyler, thank you. Bloomberg's Washington correspondent with us live on the North Lawn of the White House. We'll let you know if there's more posting on Truth Social, because we haven't heard from or seen the president making public comment today, at least not yet, about these issues. But it is a great opportunity to spend some time on all of these issues with Congressman Gabe Amo back with us on Balance of Power here on Bloomberg, straight from Rhode Island's 1st District, the Democrat who is, in fact, vice-ranking member, as I mentioned, of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. It's great to see you, Congressman. Welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. From the great 1st District, from Woonsocket all the way down to Newport, as we've discussed, you are the epitome of the K-shaped economy in so many ways. And I want to get to some of these issues domestically, but as far as these go here, from your perch on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, have you been briefed on Operation Outcast? Did you hear that these Canadian tariffs were coming, and what should be Democrats' response?
Well, look, Congress has been on a district work period.
Yes, of course.
So I know as much now as I am at home as I do when we're here generally, because this administration has put Congress in the back burner and has not emphasized collaboration, cooperation, and really getting the consent of Congress to carry out its actions on the global stage. And what we see is governing by Truth Social and chaos to our north and certainly in Asia and across the world when the president continues this war in Iran that is raising the costs on the lives of the American people.
Well, the cost issue is a real one, and we'll, I'm sure, get into affordability with gas prices on the rise, food prices on the rise. But are you encouraged to see the president turn from military action to economic coercion? Is this the direction we should be taking?
Well, look, I'm not going to praise an arsonist for trying to put the fire out that they started. And the fact of the matter is, we are here because the president abandoned diplomacy with Iran and decided to go forward with an illegal war with Iran that has done nothing to make the world more stable and has only made the lives of Americans worse off. And so we were told about an economic D-Day.
That's right.
I don't know. I haven't seen one. I haven't seen anything of that nature. And in fact, as you just shared, China remains resolute in its vision of what should happen.
So should we be
forward.
putting secondary sanctions on Chinese buyers of Iranian oil?
Look, I think
what does that cause?
I think what we have is more piecemeal strategy from the administration. Instead of trying to understand what we're trying to get, we've had shifting rationale from the beginning, whether it was an imminent threat to dealing with a nuclear weapon on the horizon, to now, because of the situation that the Trump administration created, a Strait of Hormuz where we get unreliable reports about the level of openness it currently has.
Yes, right.
So again, taking this piecemeal instead of a macro strategy leads us to a situation where they are reaching and grasping at straws.
I'm glad that you mentioned the Truth Social. The president announcing today that the Strait of Hormuz has officially been demined. He made that announcement last week. Do you know what he's talking about?
I have no idea what he's talking about.
So was it mined and has it been demined?
And this is something that I'm seeking answers to immediately from this administration. Look, Congress will, at least the House, will return to town next week. And I'm demanding alongside my colleagues a full briefing and update on their activities, including the cost of their activities. I joined a letter with dozens of my colleagues asking for a full accounting of where we are and why the American people are feeling the pain that they are feeling at the gas pump, at the grocery store, as they're doing their back-to-school shopping.
You mentioned affordability, and of course, we look at gas prices every day around here. We're at $4.09 a gallon, nationally speaking. In the great state of Rhode Island, you're at $4.05. What the president is doing with Canada now, we're told, could make prices even higher. We took a look to just get a sense of Rhode Island's trade relationship with Canada because so many northern states have a robust one. And sure enough, more than 1,400 jobs at some 45 Canadian-owned companies doing business in the state. Cross-border trade, and this is really what we're talking about here, supports more than 25,000 Rhode Island jobs, according to the Canadian Consulate General in Boston. When you hear dollar-for-dollar tariffs, realizing they're not in place yet, what does that mean for home?
Well, it means that the hardworking people that I work for in Rhode Island are going to feel pain. I think about all the fishermen. That's a big one of our exports in Rhode Island, especially calamari, the calamari comeback state, as we were once referred to. That means a lot. All of these people who are working every day with higher costs because of this administration will suffer. And then what might not be reflected in those numbers is the impact on tourism. You know, you mentioned I have Newport in my district. I have the birthplace of the American.
When's the last time you saw a Canadian walking around?
Well, they're around, but I'll say the numbers are down. I've spoken with the tourism councils. I've spoken with leaders there who have said that the bad feelings, the animus between our nations has yielded less interest in coming down. You see it in tour bus numbers. You see it at all of our sites. So there is a secondary set of effects with the lack of good feeling between our nations. When you have the president saying that he wants to rename Lake Ontario, look,
you know somebody's showing up with legislation to do that next week.
He's a one-trick pony. We already did that thing. You know, the president has to step up to the plate and lead.
Yeah.
And right now, all he's doing is causing more chaos. And who hurts? The American people every single time at their bank accounts and at their dinner tables when they're making these tough decisions.
Do you take heart in the fact that Canadian tariffs don't take effect till next month, and those we are threatening don't take effect till January of 2027? Everybody climbs down from this, right? Have we not seen this movie?
Well, brinksmanship should not be the way we operate.
Yeah.
There are other ways to conduct our business. We have had a trade agreement that is now in peril in USMCA that certainly has been disregarded in this moment. So I would say to the Trump administration, it's time to lower the temperature. It's time to get to the table and let's figure out how we can continue to make the lives of Americans better. You know, everything from construction materials to appliances to agriculture.
Right.
And now, because the Canadians are well aware that we have an election on the horizon, we see this hurting states where people have already been hit by the tariff regime that we saw previously, in addition to the high cost of living driven by the higher cost of fertilizer, the higher cost of machinery, all of the things that may be passing through the Strait of Hormuz in a normal time, but aren't now.
When you're back next week, it's going to remind us of so many things left undone. What will happen between now and the midterms? Will we actually see a CR codified? Do we have to worry about a government shutdown?
Well, look, I hope that cooler heads prevail. The Senate came to a bipartisan agreement to take us through December 11th, which happens to be my birthday.
Hey.
And I'm hopeful that we can pass something in the House to avert a shutdown crisis. Those are never good for anybody. That's why during the last shutdown, I pushed forward a piece of legislation to lessen the impact on women and children, the WIC program that was affected by a shutdown. We can't have working people, have children who need to eat, have the families of my district and districts across America suffer because of the chaos of the Trump administration and Republican Congress. We have to fight for lower costs and do everything we can to stop the chaos.
Where are you on the request for this Pentagon? $1.5 trillion. You're on the budget committee as well, the mighty budget committee, which is pretty important in the time that we're walking into here. I realize we're not going to have regular order, but there will be a robust debate about the Pentagon. Many Democrats see that as a proxy on the war with Iran. Do you?
I think any dollar that I sign off on without having a full airing from this administration about where we are going and how we got here is me signing off on an illegal war that I never had an opportunity to vote on. In fact, voted to stop with war powers resolutions with my colleagues in the House and Senate. And so we need to have a robust conversation because I want to protect our troops. I will always work hard to protect our troops, but I will not continue the chaos. Full stop. And until this administration shows up with real numbers or real accounting and a way to stop this pain that the American people are facing, we can't have a real honest conversation about paying for this war.
This is like the nicest week of the year in Rhode Island. What are you doing in Washington, D.C.? You and I are like the only people here. Are you working?
I happen to be here for an event later this evening.
It wasn't IndyCar? I thought you were going to tell me it was the race. All right.
I've been to the Indy 500 though, but
I
wasn't here for the races.
All right. Well, I hope you get home for some calamari. That's what they call it on Federal Hill, right? I don't know. I still call it calamari with the marinara. Anyway, it's great to see you. My regards to the great state of Rhode Island with many friends and family. Thanks to Congressman Gabe with us here. In the throes of recess, how about it? Live in Washington, we'll assemble our political panel next. Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino are on the way in, only on Bloomberg.
It's 1:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Stocks higher, oil lower. Right now, we have got the S&P 500 index up 16 to 76.68. That is a gain of just about 0.2%. Dow Industrials up 63 now, up by 0.1%. NASDAQ up 134 for the NASDAQ Composite Index, a gain of 0.5%. The SOX, the Philadelphia Stock Exchange's Semiconductor Index, up 1.1%. Nvidia ahead of earnings, trading higher by 1.8%. Nvidia reports tomorrow after the close of trading. The The 2-year yield 4.20% with the 10-year, 4.64%, the 30-year, 5.17%. Spot gold down $10 the ounce, 46.41, down 0.2%. West Texas Intermediate crude oil 82.34 a barrel. WTI down 3.1%. A barrel of Brent 88.55. Brent crude down 3.9%. Bitcoin had been back above $80,000. It is little change now at 78,941. We're keeping an eye on shares of Dick's Sporting Goods. The stock plunging by 28.9%. It lowered its full-year outlook amid weakness in its recently acquired Foot Locker unit, overshadowing sales gains during the World Cup. Dick's bought Foot Locker last year for $2.4 billion. Nike, a major supplier to Dick's and Foot Locker, also trading lower. Again, we've got Dick's Sporting Goods down 29%. Nike shares lower now by 2.4%. Recapping, S&P up 16, up 0.2%. That, Joe Mathieu, is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Who is there left to sell Nike? I don't get it. There's just always, it's got a 3 handle now. Nike, at some point.
Yeah,
NKE. We'll see what happens.
Nike down 2.5%, but that the Dick's stock quote there. Once in a while, we have 100% reliability on what I see on the Bloomberg, but sometimes you look at it, Joe. I don't know if this has happened to you. You look at a number and you think, "Is that right?" And that's the initial reaction I had when I saw the Dick's quote there, but down 28.81% right now. So absolutely amazing.
Whiz.
Yep, absolutely.
So Nike down in sympathy, as they say. Charlie, thank you so much.
My
the
pleasure,
great Charlie Pellet, the voice of Wall Street, will be back in just about 20 minutes with another check on the markets here. Looking forward to spending some time with our panel on this, because I'll tell you what, when the headline broke right before the late edition of Balance of Power late yesterday, this looked like a whopper. When you look beyond the headline, it's a little bit less intense when it comes to mail-in voting. The Supreme Court allowing the president's restrictions that he put forth in executive order on mail-in voting to proceed for now. But this is far from over, leaving uncertain whether these restrictions are legal or, in fact, will even be able to be used in this year's midterms. It's going back to the lower court here, remembering that a bunch of Democratic state attorneys general had challenged this EO that directed the Department of Homeland Security to compile lists of citizens eligible to vote. The U.S. Postal Service separately ordered to craft rules restricting ballots, I should say, to those on these state-submitted lists of eligible voters. It's a 6-3 ruling. We're going to get more on this, as we learned last evening from Greg Storr. But there's way more to this than the ruling. What the president is doing with the U.S. Postal Service is far more important, at least, again, for now. The New York Times spent some time on this with good reporting today. 4 weeks before the president put forth this executive order on mail-in ballots, he filed 4 nominations for vacancies on the Board of Governors at the U.S. Postal Service. Bucking history here and what has tended to happen in the past, all 4 were Republicans. There was the long-standing practice of nominating board members in bipartisan pairs. That's out the window. 4 Republicans now. 3 of them, interestingly, have cast doubt on who won the 2020 presidential election. So we have 2026 in mind. We also have 2028 in mind. And when you talk to lawmakers, as the Times did, about the confirmation process for these nominees and what they said in their questionnaires, it raises many questions now about the role that the Postal Service may or may not play in future elections in this country. It's where we start with our political panel. Bloomberg Politics contributors Jeanne Zaino and Rick Davis join us now. Jeanne is our Democratic analyst and democracy visiting fellow at Harvard Kennedy School's Ash Center. Rick is our Republican strategist and partner at Stonecourt Capital. Jeanne, when you start reading through some of the biographical information on those who were appointed and their commentary about 2020, it's really something. You've got Jeffrey Brodsky, who is a co-founder of a management consultant firm, would not say who won the 2020 election. William Gallo, a retired commodities broker. Robert Stevens, a former top executive at Marvel. These are the folks. And then there was a 4th who withdrew his nomination for personal reasons. What is the president trying to do, Jeanne, with the post office?
He's trying to do what he's been doing since before he got back into office. He is trying to put his thumb on the scale of federal elections in every way he can. We've seen it with mid-decade redistricting. We're seeing it with the board, the post office. We're seeing it with the EO. The list goes on. And this has sparked so much fear among so many Americans because we all lived through January 6th. We all remember that the president will not be stopped in these attempts. And who did we rely on to protect us at that point? Well, we relied on the courts time after time after time in over 60 cases to strike down the Republican and the president's cases, and to agree that Joe Biden had fairly won the 2020 election. And we're facing that all over again. And now we've got a Supreme Court that at 6-3 is saying, not on the merits, but is saying that there hasn't been enough harm shown to these 23 states that filed. And so we're going to wait this thing out. And you've got the liberals turning around and saying, wait this out. Mail-in ballots go out in North Carolina next week. How long are we going to wait to see harm? So this is where we are. And his activities with the post office, if you can call them that, are just another part and parcel of this story that we've been watching for, a decade now.
So is this really, Rick, an argument about 2028? We can't change the rules on mail-in ballots this close to November, can we?
Well, I think the president's intent was to change the rules on mail-in vote this election cycle. Yeah. He may be thwarted by the courts in order to do that. And showing harm is actually a little more complicated than just making a legal case. The harm would be if the Postal Service actually started limiting what ballots they could send out on mail-in ballots. But another federal case has actually banned them from implementing this program. So the Supreme Court basically said, look, if there's no implementation, there's no harm. And so it's not like they got to go find harm. They would actually have to have the U.S. Postal Service implement the program. So it's a little more complicated, I think, on the back end of this. But the bottom line is this president, for whatever reason, has defied sort of Republican orthodoxy, which is separation of national government versus state government. And we always side with state government. The best government is the government closest to the people. And so elections, according to the Constitution, are supposed to be administered through the state legislatures by the states. And Donald Trump doesn't like that concept. Every piece of legislation or executive order that he's tried to implement around elections has basically been federal getting their nose under the tent of running elections, especially in any federal election. And so there's a fundamental issue here that's constitutional. There's an implementing issue that is, being prosecuted in the courts, and the Supreme Court will have to wait around. And to answer your original question, yeah, that probably means 2028. Okay,
but also, Rick, you've spoken about mail-in ballots and the role that they play within the Republican electoral process. You talk about Republican orthodoxy on federal versus state. This is something that Republicans have used to elect Republicans for years, particularly throughout southern states. In your state of Arizona that you worked in with John McCain for so many years, the president himself voted by mail. The extent to which he's seized on this, if we did everything that we wanted or that he wanted here in limiting mail-in ballots, would it not hurt Republicans?
Yeah, I think it hurts the system completely. And in many states, first of all states are different, right? That's the blessing and curse of our political system. We have 50 states and they all have their own rules. That's the point. And in a state like Arizona, you learn how to deal with it. And frankly, Republicans were winning an enormous amount of elections because they were able to identify their voters, track the process through mail-in ballots, and know whether they voted or not. And in many states, like Arizona, the vast majority of people who vote are voting mail-in. I mean, probably 60, 70% of Arizona voters, and a lot of those, if not more than half, are Republicans. And so there's not a political operative in the country who doesn't love mail-in ballots, because you actually can track the process of voting, and you don't have to wait around for Election Day and hope for the best.
Wow. What's the Democratic answer to this, Jeanne? Do you sit back and watch it happen knowing that it might hurt Republicans more than your party?
I think, sure, the Democrats can, but I think this is broader than either Republicans or Democrats. This is the president creating a problem that does not exist. The whole predicate for this is the president keeps telling people there is fraud in mail-in balloting. And the fact is there is not. As you mentioned, he himself votes by mail-in ballot, as did 47 million Americans in the last election, 1/3 of all ballots. It is so rare, Joe, that the Brennan Center for Justice determined that you're more likely statistically to be struck by lightning than to commit mail-in or voter fraud. The Brookings Institute did an extensive study, and they found there were only 4 documented cases of fraud in 10 million mail-in ballots. So this is what frustrates Americans about our government and, quite frankly, this president. We have so many issues to be addressing, whether it's flock cameras, whether it's data centers, whether it's a war in Iran, whether it's inflation, jobs, the list goes on. And you are talking about a problem that does not exist. Again, 4 in 10 million ballots of documented fraud. And that, to me, is really the real frustrating part of this, whether you're Republican or Democrat, quite frankly.
Boy. This is pretty amazing, Rick, and I don't know how the rank and file manage this. If the president continues to denigrate mail-in ballots and refer to them as the basis of fraud, what do you do if you're a Republican House member running for re-election? If you're a Republican senator hoping to get the votes that you need, in many cases through the mail this November?
Yeah, I mean, it's cringeworthy to see the president's posts on social media and comments in the public, because these are the people who actually have to rely on their voters. And a lot of Republican voters are in rural areas where getting to the polls are not easy. And so they have to, hide behind the president on this. They're not going to argue with them. You don't see any Republican backlash from elected officials, but every single day they're out there, whipping their campaigns to try and make sure that absentee ballots get to their voters and get turned in. And literally every week you get the update from the county election office tells you who's voted. I mean, you can't get a better system than that as far as accountability.
How about that? Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino break it down, as always, our Bloomberg Politics contributors. When the court rules again, assuming that it will, we'll let you know here, of course, on Balance of Power. We've got much more to follow here. In fact, former Congressman Kevin Brady is going to join us. The latest standoff between the U.S. and Canada. It's all ahead here on Balance of Power, only on Bloomberg TV Radio.
It's 1:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We have got stocks higher. Oil is selling off. Got to begin with crude right now. West Texas Intermediate, $82.27 a barrel. It is down 3.2%. Barrel of Brent, the global benchmark, now back below $89, trading down by almost 4%. Bottom line here is oil declines. Stocks are higher. S&P up 13 right now, 76.66. That is a gain of 0.2%. Dow Industrials up 71, up 0.1%. NASDAQ up 126, up 0.5%. The NASDAQ 100 index up by 0.5%. And the SOX, the Philadelphia Stock Exchange's semiconductor index, up by 1.2%. All of this ahead of Nvidia earnings after the bell tomorrow. Very closely watched by Wall Street. Nvidia up now by 1.8%. 2-year 4.20% with the 10-year 4.64%. The 30-year 5.17%. Gold now at a 3-month low. Right now we have got 3-month high, I should say. We've got gold trading little change now at $46.41 the ounce, down 0.2%. Crude, as we mentioned, big story there, down now by 3.3% on WTI, $82.21 a barrel. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney is matching President Trump's tariffs with a 50% tax on U.S. dairy and steel. Meanwhile, EWC, that is the iShares Canada ETF, up today by 0.8%. We'll have a whole lot more on Canada and trade coming up for you in just a moment here on Balance of Power. United adding 10 destinations in Europe and Asia to its network next year. Shares of UAL up by 1%. Another cross-Atlantic operator, Delta, trading higher by 0.3%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That Joe Mathieu is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, many thanks. We'll have more with Charlie Pellet, the voice of Wall Street, coming up at the top of the hour, 2 p.m. Eastern, as we kick off Bloomberg Business Week Daily. Thanks for joining us here on Balance of Power. We're live from Washington on Bloomberg TV and radio, connecting the dots between Wall Street and Washington. And there's a lot to connect today with so much talk about tariffs, about sanctions, and about debt. We touched on some of these a bit earlier with the Congressman from Rhode Island. But as this tit for tat reaches new levels between the United States and Canada, we wanted to seize on the moment with someone who is steeped in this relationship, in cross-border trade, and as well, the matter of tax and spending. As former chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, a legend in Republican politics, former Congressman Kevin Brady, with us now from Texas. Mr. Chairman, it's great to see you. Welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. I think the last time we had a conversation.
You, Joe. Things are going well.
Well, thank you. I hope your summer's been great. The last time I believe you were at this table with me here in Washington, we were joined by the two gentlemen who helped to negotiate the USMCA. And now that we have seen this relationship devolve to the point of dollar-for-dollar counter tariffs with Canada, I'm wondering if you see the opportunity for a deal here or an intractable situation with Canada.
Yeah, so look, there's no question. What occurred was a serious bump in the road, no doubt about that. But it's not necessarily a fatal one, in the sense that in the negotiations that had been occurring in the weeks before, there was certainly a seriousness of purpose demonstrated by both countries. They were tackling issues that matter, some of them long-standing trade irritants, some of them new issues that the U.S. has raised in this joint review of the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement. There was real concrete solutions moving forward, and the hope here was that this would, if not entirely clear the decks, really lay the foundation for an announcement on country-to-country discussions, negotiations between the U.S. and Canada that would lead ultimately to a bilateral agreement, and then have the three countries, including Mexico, sit down and work through some of the president's priorities on China, economic security, and supply chains. So one thing, Joe, I've learned in trade is it's a deal is never done till it's done. No matter how close and how certain it appeared to be, it didn't. But that doesn't necessarily mean that this has to devolve further. In fact, I think as we watch the elections in Canada here, about 6 weeks away, the midterms here in the United States, I think there will be an opportunity to come back because again, they had bridged the gap in pretty significant ways on some real substantive issues.
Well, yeah. So if you go back and read coverage from Thursday, Friday, even early Saturday, there was an expectation that a deal would be struck. Things fell apart, we understand, at the last minute. But these new tariffs don't take effect yet. Canada's take effect, I believe, the 8th of September. Ours would be by January 1st, 2027. Is this just some sort of high-stakes negotiation that's playing out in public?
Look, one thing we know about trade, it is the marriage of politics and economics. And all of trade is local. And so, look, it is not surprising for a country to view what the impact of a trade agreement is going to be back home and make decisions based on that. Every country does this. In this case, I think ultimately the goal should be to get to the negotiating rounds for the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement, because that agreement has become so vital to all three countries' economies, including the U.S. We visited before about this, but because of the trade agreement the president negotiated 6 years ago, Canada and Mexico today are now America's largest customers by far, our biggest investors in the United States, mainly in manufacturing, and our most important supplier. So this is a partnership unique in the world. It is the most consequential trade agreement in the world. It is worth millions of jobs back home here in the United States. And so I think you look across these three countries, our manufacturers, farmers, small business people want to see this review come to a conclusion in a positive way. And everyone hoped that the agreement they were discussing would jumpstart those discussions.
Yes, right. Well, I mean, look, as someone who was a key negotiator in the original USMCA, did you see this coming when the president chose to not reauthorize?
You know, not surprised, because he'd been signaling it for quite a while. His agreement is working. It is the gold standard of free trade agreements in the world, no question about it. But over those 6 years, you know, some of the issues were not enforced as the U.S. had hoped. There have been new issues evolving, including China's super aggressiveness, transshipment of goods, moving them through Mexico unfairly, issues like that needed to be raised. And so I think what was important, the president didn't withdraw. He simply said, unlike Canada and Mexico, I'm not going to renew it in its current form, and set up the negotiations with Mexico. So clearly there is a path here. Ambassador Greer has adopted sort of the same formula, the same model that's been used in these reciprocal trade agreements. It's a model the president's familiar with, because at the end of the day, I think Ambassador Greer hopes to take an agreement to the president by the end of the year, get that sign off, negotiate the final details of it. I think the biggest impact of this may be a delay in that timetable.
Interesting. Yeah, you do wonder what Mexico thinks of this particular stop on the road here and how it might impact our longer-term negotiations. But all this is happening, Mr. Chairman, while lawmakers are out of town. We're in August recess right now, and they're going to be piling back next week with a lot to manage here, including trade, foreign policy with regard to Canada, with regard to Iran, of course. And then there's going to be the matter of budgeting for the new fiscal year, and we've got a continuing resolution that you can weigh in on if you want. But one thing that the White House appears to be seeking is some changes to capital gains. And I'm wondering your thoughts on this. As the former chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, you've had this argument before about indexing capital gains, as the president has reportedly suggested he would like to see. Is there an appetite for that in this Congress?
You know, I would hope so. Obviously, this is a very pro-growth issue, and we had wanted to lower the capital gains rate in TCJA. At the end of the day, sort of ran out of the money to do it, but there's no question about it. If you index it, you quit taxing people on inflation for their assets, which I think is a good principle, period. Secondly, it unlocks these assets, whether they're physical ones, stocks, other type of investments. That's good for the economy as well, creates new opportunities. You know, there is a cost to it always. On these issues, you've got to weigh the pro-growth outcome against what that tax cut cost. But at the end of the day, America, one of the reasons we have such a resilient economy and the largest in the world, we have an investment infrastructure in the tax code. It encourages investment by a lot of Americans, a lot of businesses, in a way that grows the economy. Capital gains is a big part of that. Those investment incentives that works.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, the bond market's been getting agitative, Mr. Chairman. Maybe you have too. We're looking at a long bond has been above 5.2% here. The 10-year, we're told, is going to be at 5% at some point. It's just a question of when. And it all came after this realization that our federal debt was at $40 trillion. It looks like a typo even days after it was first published. As we try to get our heads around a number like that, is this the right time to be potentially lowering our capital gains revenue?
You know, actually, I think last time we lowered the rate, the revenue from capital gains actually grew. Sort of like as we did in 2017 when we lowered the corporate tax rate, tax revenue from those corporations grew. Economic growth really is a budget tool for you as long as you restrain spending. That's where we're failing in a big way. We've got record revenues coming in, but our spending's outpacing it. And the stunning number, I agree with you, 40 trillion just is a kick to the gut, I think. Secondly, it's not going to take care of itself. Congress is going to have to act to move forward, especially as we look at Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, others moving toward serious insolvency issues here. So you've got to have that restraint. I did appreciate Republicans, I think, came up with $1.5 trillion in their recent permanence of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. A good start. They'd like to go farther. But at the end of the day, America really needs to tie our spending to the size of our economy and right size it over time to where we're not a financial risk going forward.
Well, of course, you've seen the Treasury Secretary get involved in the bond market, which has been somewhat controversial, and it hasn't made a big difference yet, realizing that he could still do a lot more buying here. We heard from Stanley Druckenmiller. Did you see this op-ed this morning, Mr. Chairman? Governments defending prices against fundamentals always lose, he says. That's Bessent's own mentor, Druckenmiller. The only variable, he writes, is how much they spend before conceding. Is this the right move right now?
You know, I think getting fiscal policy right is the only solution here. It's not going to come from the Fed. It will not come from Treasury or any administration, frankly. It's going to have to come from Congress. Setting guardrails around spending, putting in place enforceable spending caps, and over time, you're not going to fix this problem immediately, but over time, right-sizing that government in a way that markets, more importantly, the country feels more secure. Joe, I have to tell you, my first 4 years in Congress, we balanced the budget every year. And I just assumed it would always be that way. But we've never seen a balanced budget since those days. So this is long overdue. I do think there are a lot of members in Congress, certainly my Republican colleagues, who this is what they wake up to. This is what scares them the most, this debt and deficit. So don't think all of Congress is ignoring this. I think there is a pretty strong crew of members who know we've really got to face this down.
Boy, until then, it's a continuing resolution, right? Nobody's crafting a budget between now and November.
Yeah, our budget process is broken, Joe. Has been for a long time. I would love to see budget reforms. I've seen them through the years get floated. They're really smart. They're really good. They should be bipartisan. But look, if the way our laws work, if we were a manufacturing plant, Congress would manufacture spending. That's how our budget's set up. If we want to manufacture reductions in efficiency, we got to retool the plant. That means rewriting how we do our whole budget. And I think that too is being considered by members of Congress who want to take a serious substantive look, like Jody Arrington, chairman of the Budget Committee, would be one. But there are others who are eager to join them.
Really interesting. You're paying $3.62 for a gallon of gas in Texas, which is quite a bit below the national average right now. In our remaining moment, Mr. Chairman, to what extent will affordability play into the election, the Senate election in the state of Texas?
I think it already is. Look, affordability is a big reason President Trump won the presidency for his second term. Certainly a big reason Republicans maintain the majority as well. Certainly we as Republicans and they as a party will need to make that case very strongly in Texas and across the country.
It's good to see you and good to have you back, Mr. Chairman. I hope it's been a good summer, as I mentioned. Kevin Brady with us, the former chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, Republican from Texas, House of Representatives, and former negotiator of the USMCA. I'm Joe Mathieu in Washington. Doug Ford joins us at 5 p.m. on the late edition of Balance of Power. Don't miss it on Bloomberg.